Perceptions and Culture. Presentation by David Welch. First today, I'd like to talk about web-based social cognition. Web-based social cognition is a term that refers to social cognition found through the internet. Sabates in her text notes a study that found we use a lot of the same factors online that we use in real life to form perceptions. Social cognition in the internet age was a study in 2013. It found that people rarely misrepresent themselves. We still communicate with other people to find out about the world, but we often do so mediated by a computer in a relative deprivation of the usual set of nonverbal cues included in a face-to-face interaction. Next, we'll talk about culture and the perception of self and others. In the text by Sabates, we read about evolutionary psychology. And it cites that groups perpetuate different beliefs in a study by Tooby. It also states that culture is the most important factor of human nature. It states that cultural behavior developed because of a need to help others. Further discussing perception of self and others and how it varies across cultures, we'll talk about the TED Talk from John Burrell titled How Culture Drives Behaviors. Burrell noted that in a certain culture, if you confront a perception, you're stating that you're right. If you complain about something, you end up isolating yourself from the whole. And if you conform to the diversity, you end up benefiting from it. He also talks about how Western culture is more independent and that we use cultural glasses when we form perceptions. And ultimately, we are all different culturally. For instance, he mentions politeness and how it's a group of rules that drives behaviors, and that differs from culture to culture. In one culture, it's different from another culture. Another way that perceptions vary across culture are what we call high context and low context societies. It was a term coined by Edward T. Hall in 1976, and it states that the environment in which the communication process takes place helps define the communication. It also states that perception and thought are not independent of the cultural environment. Therefore, our brains are both shaped by the external world and it also shapes our perception of the external world. Now, in my comparison of two different cultures, I chose French culture and the American culture. There was a study done by Rosen, Remick, and Fisher, 2011, and it used surveys to acquire scores to determine the differences between American culture and the French culture. And what it ultimately found is that it pointed to the French placing a higher value on joy, where America places a higher value on comfort. It also found that the French focus on quality, where Americans focus on quantity. A third characteristic it found was that the French have a low focus on differences, where Americans have a high focus on variety and the need for variety. There was also incidentally a correlation found between the two cultures based on whether they were Catholic or Protestant, coming down to moderation versus abundance, where the French tend to be very moderate in their consumption of things, and where Americans, we look for abundance. I found this to be very surprising and very interesting. And that will conclude my presentation for perception and culture. Thank you so much.